You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 109 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. And this week, we are back to some more Joe and Charlie recordings. Previously on episodes 63, 68, 71, and 75, I shared their coverage of Step 4 from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for those who haven't heard those episodes, Joe and Charlie were speakers from AA who studied the text of the Big Book, and I have a recording called The Big Book Comes Alive, where they go through and examine the history of AA, the first 6 chapters of the Big Book, and how to work the steps as originally written. 12-step groups of all sorts, including SAA, are based on the 12 steps of AA written by Bill Wilson in the 1930s. And after sharing the recordings of Joe and Charlie talking about Step 4, I've had a few requests for more of The Big Book Comes Alive. And now I intend to make more episodes from those recordings. The problem for me is just where to start. Unlike our Green Book, the step information in the Big Book is spread out over various chapters and sections of the book. And since we have episodes of the podcast of formal first steps in SAA, I thought I would start coverage of Step 2 onwards. With Step 1, we're looking at identifying powerlessness and unmanageability. And since the Big Book covers the problems with alcohol, we need to mentally shift how it relates to sex addiction. Although there are a lot of parallels, there are parts of the recordings that do focus just on alcohol specifically, so I've tried to find a place to start and focus more on the solution of the steps. One of the first readings that my first sponsor assigned me was from the Big Book and a section called The Doctor's Opinion. It talks about the disease of alcoholism or addiction being both of mind and body. And as Joe and Charlie mentioned, this used to be on page 1 in the first edition of the Big Book, but from the second edition on, it was shifted into the Roman numerals at the beginning, along with the preface and the foreword to various editions. Chapter 1, Bill's story, which now starts on page 1, and Chapter 3, more about alcoholism, focus more on Step 1 and being powerless over alcohol. And while they are great chapters and have a lot of great information, and Joe and Charlie's coverage is just awesome, I plan on skipping those for the podcast and starting our focus on Step 2. So Chapter 2, there is a solution, and Chapter 4, we agnostics, cover Step 2 in finding a higher power. It took me a while, but through editing, I found a place to start with the Joe and Charlie recordings on part of the foreword and the doctor's opinion before moving to Chapter 2. A lot of what they cover here comes back into the future parts of the recording, so I did want to make sure that I covered this. Since some of Joe and Charlie's stories are focused more on specific problems with alcohol and being drunk, I've decided my best to shape the recordings to convey the message of the doctor's opinion. And I skipped over their coverage of the history of Alcoholics Anonymous and jump into the foreword of the Big Book. And with that, I've chosen a reading from the Doctor's Opinion, and this is Roman numeral 26 in my edition of the book. They do cover this in the recording, but I wanted to read a little bit beyond what they covered. And again, we have to mentally shift, talking about the effects of alcohol to the effects of sex addiction. So Roman numeral 26, XXVI. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he had despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. And skipping down a little bit, one feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. So yeah, that is from the doctor's opinion, and it does cover the powerlessness and unmanageability in step 1, as well as focusing on something outside of ourselves to produce that psychic change, that looking for a higher power. So again, with step 2. And again, a lot of what's covered in this section of the book and in these recordings will come up later in the recordings. And so with that out of the way, here is Joe and Charlie, The Big Book Comes Alive, covering the doctor's opinion. Here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
We studied this book for quite some time until we began to realize that the book was really written to convey those 3 basic ideas that we've been talking about. Or you might say it's really written to reach 3 goals. And the first goal in this book is, what is the problem? Before you can recover from anything, you've got to understand what the problem really is. And prior to Dr. Silkworth coming along in the 1930s, nobody ever understood the problem of alcoholism. They all thought it was willpower, moral character, sin, and etc. And very, very few alcoholics ever recovered from it. So this idea, these ideas from Dr. Silkworth meant so much to Bill Wilson and so much to the first 100 people. And when they got ready to write this book back in 1937, the first 40 did then, turned out to be 100 by 39. They went to the doctor and they said, we would like to take this information that you have given to us and put it in this book with your permission. And he said, well, that'll be fine if you want to do that. And they said, would you be willing to write some of this information for us? And he said, yes, I would be glad to, with one provision. You can't use my name in it. He says this is absolute heresy as far as the medical profession is concerned. They don't want to believe the fact that it's an illness. And if you put my name on it, they'll throw me out of the medical profession just as sure as anything. So in the first 16 printings of the Big Book, it just says the doctor's opinion, dash, dash, dash. No Dr. Silkworth in it. Now in 1956 and 57, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, had recognized alcoholism as a full-blown disease. And when they came out with the second edition in 1955, Dr. Silkworth said, you can put my name in it now. So the second edition, third edition, and fourth editions always got Dr. Silkworth's name in it. Didn't have it in the first edition, though. And so we think there's primarily two chapters in the Big Book that's going to be able to show us what the problem really is. And first is the doctor's opinion. And there we get the same information that he conveyed to Bill Wilson. Then in chapter 1, Bill's story, we're going to have an example, a classic example of a practicing alcoholic. And we're going to be able to see his craving that developed in his body after he took a drink. We're going to be able to see his obsession of the mind. We're going to be able to see primarily everything we need to know to understand the problem in the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. We'll pick some of it out of chapter 2 and 3, but most of it, the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. And there we're going to be able to see that we are absolutely powerless over alcohol. And we might just, for the time being, boil step 1 down to one word: we're powerless. We're going to be able to see why and how we're powerless through that part of the book. And that's really dealing with step 1. Now, if we are powerless over alcohol, then obviously the answer would lie within power. And we got 3 chapters that are designed to show us that power and the need for that power that is greater than human power. Chapter 2, there is a solution, and he's going to talk to us about the power of the fellowship and the power of the vital spiritual experience to help us overcome alcoholism. Chapter 3, he's going to talk more about alcoholism. And he's going to explain to us exactly what's going to happen to us if we don't find that power, because he's going to talk about the insanity of alcoholism and how it will return if we don't find that power. And then also he's going to show us some ideas, new ideas about that power. In chapter 4, we agnostics, one of the greatest pieces of spiritual information I ever read. Let me discard some old ideas about God and then start operating on some new ideas and let God prove to me that there is a kind and a loving God rather than hellfire and brimstone. So chapters 2, 3, and 4 are all going to deal with power, and that's step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. If our problem is powerless, if the answer lies within power, then we just need to know one more thing. How do you find that power? And we've got 3 chapters. Chapter 5, how it works. Chapter 6, into action. Chapter 7, working with others. That shows us how to find that power. And there we're going to find the last 10 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Steps 3 through 12. And we get through with those, then we have found the power, and we can recover from alcoholism. You know, when I first started reading this book, I had no idea that it was written in a certain sequence to convey certain ideas. I read it more or less as you read a novel. And I read Bill's story, and I kind of agreed with it a little bit, but not a hell of a lot. I read chapter 2, there is a solution, and I sure didn't want any part of that, because that talked about God. I read chapter 3, and it talked about insanity, and I knew I wasn't crazy. And I read how it works, and I sure as hell didn't want to do those things. And then I'd go back in the back of the book, and I'd read a story, and that was kind of interesting. I'd just jump back and forth, around and around. But if we begin to look at this book as laid out in a certain sequence to convey these ideas in the same sequence that the first 100 had to know them, what is the problem, what is the solution, and what is the program of action, then it becomes a very fascinating book, because you'll be able to see how one chapter ties to the next chapter, how one paragraph ties to the next paragraph, giving us these ideas as we go through to bring about these 3 different ideas, or these 3 main goals of the big book.
In the doctor's opinion, one of the most important chapters in the book. The first 16 printings of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you can check it out, but looking over here, was on page 1. Wasn't in the Roman numeral section. 1955, for some unknown reason. We don't know why or how. They took the doctor's opinion off of page 1, put it in the Roman numeral section, and put Bill's story on page 1. And the fellowship got away from the doctor's opinion. But this book is laid out, like Charlie said, in a certain sequence to bring about certain ideas. I was in the printing business. I owned a printing company that printed books like this. I've sat in on many, many conversations about the way to lay out a book. And I didn't think this book was laid out in any particular manner. After all, a bunch of old drunks wrote it, so what would they know about a book? The way I figured. I was very open-minded, you see. Come to find out, it's laid out in they had a lot of good professional help doing this. As Charlie said, and I believe this, every paragraph and every chapter is right where it's supposed to be that leads us to the next and to the next and to the next. Been pretty much the way Bill received it himself. His first experience with getting sober was with Dr. Silkworth, the doctor's opinion. He learned through sharing with Dr. Bob about his story. And so he shares his story for identification so that we can identify with another alcoholic. He gives us these solutions. There is a solution. Most of us are not going to like that solution any more than he did. Remember, he was aghast, that solution. So he tells us more about alcoholism, more about what's going to happen to us unless we accept that solution. Then he gives us chapter 4, probably one of the most important chapters ever written, I believe, the chapter, We Agnostics. Gnostic means knowledge. You put the ag in front of any word, it means without. Those are us who are without knowledge. And certainly that's what I had. And the knowledge that I did have was that of a 7-year-old boy when I arrived here. And you can imagine what it was. I needed some more information, better information than I had. And then it tells us how it works. Into action, not into thinking. God, don't think, please don't think. Into action. Then once we've had this experience and recovered, then we can work with other people. We can carry this message to other people. And back on page 45, it said the main object of this book was to enable me to find a power greater than myself which would solve my problem. Didn't say would help me solve my problem. I find the power, and the power would solve the problem. And that's the way the book is written. Just that way for us to do those things in that order. He said the doctor's opinion, Roman numeral page 23, or I guess it's 25 in the 4th edition. We try to keep up with that.
Yeah.
So we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in a medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in the book. Convincing testimony must surely come from the medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. Remember, this used to be on page 1. Now, to whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I'd come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics.
Of course, he's referring to Bill Wilson now.
Impressing upon them that they must do likewise for still others. This become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. I personally know scores of cases who were the type with whom the other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely upon anything they may say about themselves. I'm not quite sure about that.
I agree with everything you said except the last statement.
Yours very truly, William D. Silkworth. The physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. Excuse me. In this statement, he confirms what we have suffered in alcoholic torture must believe. Now, there's no must in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm aware of. But there's a lot of musts in this book, and there's one of them. We must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind.
Now, this is the first time we can find anywhere in written history a reference to the fact that the body is affected as well. Everything up until this point dealt with the mind only. Weak will, moral character, sin. But now he's saying that the body is quite as abnormal as the mind. I think he's saying two things. The body is abnormal when it comes to alcohol, and the mind is abnormal when it comes to alcohol. And we're going to talk about those two abnormalities before we're through. The abnormal reaction to alcohol, both physically and mentally. The first thing we'll talk about is the body.
We'll separate it from the mental, and then we'll talk about the mental a little bit later. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we're in full flight from reality, or were outright mental effects. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us. But we're sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinions to its soundness may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that its explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account.
Okay, now if the purpose of a textbook is to transfer information from the mind of one human being or a group of human beings through the written word to the mind of another human being, thereby increasing the knowledge of the user of the book, and I think that's what they're for, then it stands to reason the transference of that information is going to be based upon the understanding of the words that are used in the book. If the writer uses a certain word and has a certain understanding of it, the reader of the book reads that word but has a different understanding of it, then the information that comes through is going to be garbled and incomplete information. And it seems as though there's a certain few key words in the big book that many of us have had difficulty in the past understanding them the way the writer understood them. And I think the first one is this word allergy. You know, most of us, before we come to AA, we've got a preconceived idea about allergies. I know I did. And I knew if you were allergic to something and you got around it or you ate it or you drank it or whatever, there would be some physical manifestation or indicator of that allergy. For instance, if you're allergic to strawberries and you eat them, you break out in a rash. The rash being the physical manifestation of that allergy. If you're allergic to milk and you drink it, you have a bad case of dysentery. The dysentery being the physical manifestation of that allergy. If you're allergic to certain plants, such as ragweeds, you get around them, your eyes itch, your nose itch, they water, and you begin to sneeze. The itchy, watery eyes, the sneezing, those are the physical manifestations of that allergy. So I knew if you were allergic to something, there would be some manifestation that you could see. So I come to AA, and they say, Charlie, you're allergic to alcohol. You'll never be able to safely drink it again. And I said, how in the hell can I be allergic to alcohol? I'm drinking a quart a day. How can you possibly drink that much of something you're allergic to? And I said, besides that, when I drink alcohol, I don't break out in a rash. I don't have a bad case of dysentery. Once in a while I would, depending on what I've been drinking, but usually I didn't. Nor did it make my eyes, nose itch, water, and cause me to sneeze. And I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. You need to explain that to me. And one day, in sheer, complete desperation, I went to a source of information that has never failed me since that time. I went to a dictionary, and I looked up the word allergy. And I found several definitions, the same as you do with any word, depending on how you use it. But I think I found the one that fits me exactly. It said an allergy is an abnormal reaction to any food, beverage, or substance of any kind. An abnormal reaction.
So if you think this big book is enlightening and surprised at what you might find in it, try one of those dictionaries. It's amazing what's in there. And so let's read this again now that we have that description. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinions to its soundness may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. He explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. He explains to me, for instance, why I would go down by the bar with every intention of having maybe 2 drinks and go home. Well, the next thing I know, it's midnight or 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, or the next day, or next week, and years ago, the next month, and whatever. But that's what happens when I drink. It's virtually impossible to describe or to guarantee what I'm going to do once I take a drink, because of the allergy of the body. It sets up a craving beyond my mental control, and it's more important than anything else in my life. It has been proven to be that way. And that interests me. I needed to know that information. It explains many things which I couldn't otherwise account. Now, he explains that here on that page.
A good textbook never tells you anything but what it doesn't back it up with additional information to prove the point. Let's now go over to Roman numeral 26.
Or 28.
Or 28 in the 4th edition. And we're going to talk about this allergy again just a little bit.
So we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic, I was diagnosed as a chronic alcoholic. I didn't like that diagnosis. I understand it today, but I still don't like it much. Chronic simply means doing the same things over and over and over. So I was a chronic alcoholic. It is a manifestation of an allergy, and that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. The average temperate drinker is not allergic to alcohol. Only alcoholics are. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence to reliance upon things human, the problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve.
Okay. The manifestation of the allergy to strawberries is a rash. You can see it. The manifestation of the allergy to milk is dysentery. You can see it. The manifestation of the allergy to ragweeds is itchy, watery eyes, sneezy. You can see it. The manifestation of the allergy to alcohol is referred to here as the phenomenon of craving. He calls it a phenomenon because he didn't understand why. He says the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So the manifestation of our allergy is the actual physical craving that develops in the body after we've had a drink or 2 of alcohol. Now, the only way an alcoholic can crave alcohol is to put it in the body first. Then the phenomenon of craving develops, and then we can't stop drinking. And in the context of the big book, when you see the word craving, in the first 164 pages anyhow, it's always referring to the body, never to the mind. I hear a lot of people say, I came to AA and I craved a drink for 2 years. No, in the context of the big book, that's the wrong use of that word. They needed a drink, they wanted a drink, they desired a drink. But the only way an alcoholic can crave alcohol, in the context of the big book, is to first put it in the system. Then the phenomenon of craving develops, and then we can't stop. You cannot see our allergy, you can only feel it. And only alcoholics feel it. Normal, social, temperate, moderate drinkers never experience the phenomenon of craving. Only we alcoholics experience it. That's why they will never be able to understand us, because they don't know anything about this phenomenon of craving. They never experience it, therefore they'll never understand it. So that's the real main allergy to alcohol, is we react to it entirely different physically than normal people do. Now, if I don't want my allergy to hurt me, then the only thing I've got to do is just don't drink, right? If I don't take a drink, my allergy can't hurt me. Until I saw this kind of information, I just knew there had to be some way I could drink without getting drunk. And that down there kill me, trying to drink without getting drunk. And now that I can see this, I can accept the fact I can no longer safely drink alcohol. Now, if that was my only problem, well, we'd pass the hat and everybody throw $1 in it and we'd get up and go home, wouldn't we? But I got another problem too. I got a friend who is allergic to, of all things, fish. And every time he eats fish, his throat swells up. He almost chokes to death. He ends up in a hospital. Now, the fact that he's allergic to fish, though, is beside the point, if he didn't eat fish. But he's got something in his mind that doesn't work right when it comes to fish. A light bulb that doesn't come on, or a switch that doesn't work, or something. Because from time to time, his mind tells him it's okay to eat fish. And he'll eat the fish, and he ends up in the hospital every time. And I'll bet it nearly always starts like this. Well, I haven't had any fish in 90 days. Surely I could have one piece of fish. Oh, it's those rock cod I've been eating. If I'd eat nothing but bass, everything would be okay. We might even say it's them damn people I've been eating fish with if I'd just change my crowd. Whatever the reason, his mind gives him permission to eat fish. I'm the same way when it comes to alcohol. Left on my own resources, something in my head doesn't work right. A light bulb doesn't come on, a switch doesn't close or something, because from time to time my mind tells me it's okay to take a drink of alcohol. And then the allergy takes over, and then I die. So we're going to find as we go through the book that this physical allergy thing is very important for us to know, but that's not our real problem. Our real problem centers in the mind, telling us it's okay to drink, rather than in the body that ensures that it's not okay. Let's look at the mind for just a little bit, and then we'll be through.
So the doctor says the only relief he has to suggest is just don't drink. So now we're going to talk about the most dangerous part of the illness. And the most dangerous part of the illness is not when we're drinking. It's when we are sober. You know why? Because we're thinking about drinking. That's the most dangerous part of the illness. So let's move backward now to the Roman numeral page 26 in the third edition and Roman numeral page 28 in the fourth edition. And we'll talk a bit about the mind, the obsession of the mind. It says that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol.
Now, many alcoholics are highly offended when you tell them that. They say, oh, no, that's not the reason I drink alcohol. They say, the reason I drink alcohol is I love the taste of alcohol. I wouldn't argue with them whether they do or not, I love the taste of cold beer. Always have all my life, as far back as I can remember. I also love the taste of Cold Mountain spring water. I never did sit down and drink a case of Cold Mountain spring water. Alcohol did something for me that Cold Mountain spring water doesn't do. Always on the outside of the crowd looking in. Always wanted to be a part of and knew I could not be. You ladies, I was absolutely scared to death of you. I was just tongue-tied when I got within 20 feet of one of you. And one night at a high school dance, somebody gave me a drink of moonshine whiskey. And all those fears disappeared. And I was allowed to ask a girl to dance with her. Danced with her and didn't make a fool of myself. I was allowed to ask to take her home from the dance. I was allowed to get in the back seat of a 36 Chevrolet with her and do some things I'd been wanting to do for a long, long time. I loved the effect produced by alcohol. If it made me slightly tipsy, out of control, and nauseous, I wouldn't like that. But you see, it excites me, and it turns me on. And it lets me do those things I never could do before. It lets me be just as good as anybody else. It lets me be whatever I wanted to be when I was drinking. I love the effect of it.
We can all identify with that effect, but there are many, many other effects by which we drink too. Sometimes we overdo some of those things we always wanted to do and get in a little bit of trouble. And we wake up the next morning, we have a little guilt, shame, and remorse. And we call for another drink to get rid of the guilt, shame, and remorse. And we know that alcoholism is a progressive illness. It gets worse over a period of time. And we drink for many, many other effects. In the end of my drinking, I drank for the sickest effect of all, was total oblivion. I just wanted out of it. There's only one thing wrong with a total oblivion. You wake up, right? Then you have to start drinking all over again. There are many, many effects by which we drink. He said the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, that it cannot after time differentiate the true from the false. I got where I didn't know the true from the false about my drinking. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. My alcoholic life became normal to me. The abnormal became normal. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. It became normal to me. And this is what we are when we're not drinking. They are restless, irritable, discontented. And I put a few other little words in there too. I'm full of guilt, shame, and remorse for some of the things I did while drinking. Remember when you were brand new, they said to you, hey, if you don't drink, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel resentment better. You're going to feel anger better. You're going to feel a lot of things better because we don't have the alcohol to kill the pain, you see. That's why it's important to get on through these steps as quickly as possible. Because I don't suffer well. I still don't suffer well. And I certainly did in those days. I got to find some relief for some of that guilt, shame, remorse, that restless, irritable discontentedness. If I don't, I'm going to have to go back to drink. Because I know there's a solution for that. It's recorded right up here on the hard drive. It's still there. It doesn't go away. He said, unless they can again experience the sense of ease of comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. My neighbor, he drank with impunity. He drank like I did, but he never did get into trouble I got into. So he was drinking with impunity. He said, after they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, then we take the drink. And then the phenomenal craving develops. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. Now this is repeated over and over and over and over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope for his recovery. Entire change of ideas, emotions, and attitudes while not drinking. Unless that can happen, there's very little hope for a recovery. Bill called it a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, and talks about a personality change. But here Dr. Silkwood called it a psychic change. They're all talking about the same things. Unless that can happen, there's very little hope for my recovery. And another thing that I've learned too, you can't heal a sick mind with a sick mind. Can't think your way out of it. The more we try to think our way out of it, the deeper into it we get, you see. Go ahead, Charlie.
I can see now why it was impossible for me to do so. Now that I know about the allergy, and now that I know about the progression, I can see why not only could I not control my drinking while drinking, but the drinking just got worse and worse and worse and worse. I'm a slow learner. After 3, 4, 5 years of it getting worse and worse and worse and worse, not being able to control my drinking while drinking, then I pulled out the most useful tool that an alcoholic has, which is willpower. And I said, well, since I can't seem to be able to control my drinking while drinking, then what I better do is just quit drinking. Period. Just quit drinking. Now, I would come off of those drunks, and I would be restless and irritable and discontented. I'd be filled with shame and guilt and remorse and resentment, and I didn't feel good. And over here is my emotional barometer. And as the days went by without any relief, as the days went by doing nothing about the way I felt down here, getting more and more irritable, more and more mad at my wife, more and more trouble with my kids, more and more trouble at work, I'd get to thinking about, well, now, Charlie, maybe you're not a real alcoholic. After all, you've been sober now for several days. And you could probably have 1 or 2 drinks and get by with it. I always can remember, if with a problem, how a drink always solved that problem for me. And I'd get to thinking about taking a drink, and I'd take a drink, and I'd trigger the allergy, and I'd end up drunk, and I'd come off remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. And I said, okay, now, you're really going to have to use your willpower now. And I said, sick 'em, Will. We're through with that damn drinking. And I put willpower right in there between the problem and one drink. I put willpower between the problem and the solution. And I got up the next morning, I was restless and irritable and discontented, filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse, didn't feel good. But by God, I wasn't going to drink to change it. And a day or two later, I began to think about, maybe I could take a drink and it would be okay. Or maybe it really wasn't that bad. Or maybe this time she won't file for divorce. Or maybe they really won't come and get me this time. And I'd get to thinking about taking a drink because I knew one or two drinks would make me feel good. But then I'd run into willpower. And willpower said, no, sirree, we're not going to drink. We're through with that drinking. And I wouldn't drink that day. Next day I get up and I'm still restless, irritable, and discontented. Haven't done anything to change this down on the bottom. I'm getting more and more upset with everybody around me. And I want to feel better. And I only knew one thing that would make me feel better. And it was that magic that comes from that first one or two drinks. And I'd be thinking about the great sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks, and I'd say, well, maybe I'm not alcoholic. Maybe I could drink. And I'd run into willpower. Willpower says, no, sirree, we're not drinking. And I wouldn't drink that day. And I'd go that way for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And life's getting more and more hellish all the time. And more trouble with my wife and my kids and my neighbors and my bird dogs and everything around me. Could get along with nothing. And I wanted to feel better. I only knew one way to feel better. And I got to thinking about taking a drink. And I said, man, you've been sober now for 90 days. Surely you could have one drink. But I hit old willpower again. Willpower said, no, sir, we're not going to drink. Don't you remember the last time you went to jail? Don't you remember last time she filed for divorce? Don't you remember last time you had a car wreck? And I wouldn't drink that day. But I'd get up the next day. And I'm still restless and irritable and discontented. And I want to feel better, and I only know one way to feel better, and that's take a drink. And I'd get to thinking about taking a drink, and my mind began to center on one thing only. The great sense of ease and comfort is going to come by a couple of drinks. And it centered on it so strong that it pushed out the jailhouse. It pushed out the divorce courts. It pushed out the car wrecks. And I could only see one thing, what alcohol was going to do for me. See, that's the reason willpower don't work for people like us. Because just before we take a drink, the mind sees nothing wrong with taking a drink. The idea of what we're going to get from the drink is so strong that it pushes out all ideas to the contrary. And we don't remember the jailhouses and the divorce courts and the car wrecks, and we think only about taking a drink, and suddenly the idea of taking a drink went through willpower, burned right through willpower. I took a drink and triggered the allergy, and I was off and running again. I repeated that cycle over and over and over and over and over. I came to AA. And I knew that with my superior strength and intelligence, that I didn't have to do all these things that you guys were doing. And I knew that now that I knew what was wrong with me, that I knew about the allergy and the obsession, that with my intelligence and willpower, I wouldn't have to do what you did. And 90 days later, I got drunk. And I came back to AA, and I knew damn good and well I didn't have to do those things that you guys did. And 6 months later, I got drunk. And I came back to AA, And I knew I did not have to do what you guys were telling me I had to do. And 9 months later, I got drunk again. And I damn near died from alcoholism. There is nothing any more miserable for an alcoholic than to try to stay sober left on his own resources. That is the most miserable time of my life. And I look at people in AA today, new people coming in, and they haven't got into the program yet. And they still got that obsession to drink. And I just sit there and almost cry for them because I know what they're going through. See, somehow I have to find a way to live, to keep my emotions below the level that causes me to take a drink. If I could become a little less restless, a little less irritable, a little less discontented, if I could get rid of some of this shame and fear and guilt and remorse, then maybe I could run around sober and not feel so bad that it requires me to take a drink in order to feel better. Now, how do I go about doing that? Well, that's what recovery is about. That's what the program is about. Because when I came off of that third drunk, almost dead, I came back with a different frame of mind. And I picked up the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I began to work the program out of the book. And I'm no longer restless, irritable, and discontented. I'm no longer filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse. I'm sober and I feel good. I got peace of mind, serenity, and happiness, and that's the only reason I don't drink. You see, that's what recovery is about. I think it's easy to see. If you can't drink because of this allergy, and if you can't quit because of this obsession, then you've become absolutely powerless over alcohol. And that's all step one is about. And that's what we've been talking about tonight, is step one. And those of us can make that admission, concede to our innermost self that we're alcoholic and we're never going to be able to drink like other people, that there's a possibility that we can recover from alcoholism. I've been asked to tell you that we're going to start in the morning at 9, and we run to 12. We come back at 1:30. We'll run to 5. There is nothing on tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's free. Joe, you got anything else?
That's all I got.
Okay, that's all we've got for tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Well, yeah, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Several of my sponsees have the full recordings of The Big Book Comes Alive that they use in conjunction with their step work. I find it a really helpful tool. And for the next Joe and Charlie recording, we'll be looking at Chapter 2, There's a Solution, and I believe Appendix 2 is in that recording, and that is called The Spiritual Experience. And from there, we'll move on to Chapter 4, We Agnostics, and those episodes should conclude Step 2. So before getting to some new music on my spiritual playlist and a listener email, I wanted to put out a reminder for a few events coming up here in the Bay Area and on Zoom. Our annual Giving Thanks event, which is a fun get-together as well as a fundraiser for the ISO, is happening in Berkeley on November 4th. And further details can be found on the Bay Area SAA website under News and Events. And I'll be leaving links in the show notes on making donations if you are able. You can always text the letters BAGT to 91999 to make donations. And the other links will be in the show notes. And again, since that original date of the 4th was going to be our SAA and COSA speaker meeting, we shifted that to November 5th at 5:30 p.m. And we will have speakers Jim W. from San Francisco for SAA and Julie P. from Ohio from COSA. And the Zoom info for that is now on the Bay Area SAA website. And again, that would be under News and Events. I'm currently scheduling a few new guests for future episodes of the podcast, and I also have another First Step recording that's coming up at the noon Zoom meeting. So moving on to some new spiritual music that I've added to my playlist. A few weeks ago, a singing coach that I watch on YouTube just released the first song from a project that she's been working on. And this is Beth Roars, and I believe that I played a clip of her on a previous episode of the podcast where she was interviewing former Heilung singer Jonas Lorentzen. It's an amazing interview. Yeah, I've been following her channel. She not only does reactions to different music, but also looking at trying out new things that are out of her comfort zone. She's got 2 different channels. But anyway, this is a song called Power of the Wolf, and I relate it to finding a spirit animal as a form of a higher power. So here it is, Beth Roars.
I take my pain and I make it my throne. And I will roam with the power of the wolf. And I will flow with the power of the
Such a cool tune. Yeah, that groove has been going through my head for the past week. So she released that as part 1 of her new project, and part 2 is coming out shortly, which is called Anxiety Society. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll be putting a YouTube link for that song in the show notes for this episode. So on to listener email. We received one new email this week that I wanted to share here. And it says, "Hi, just wanted to thank you for coming up with the podcast. It's been a great help for me trying to recover from my alcoholism and sex addiction. I'm new to the 12 steps for both, so your podcast helps a lot. I'm hoping that in the future I'll be able to attend one of your meetings, though I am from the Philippines and the time difference is kind of a challenge. Keep it up. You are helping people like me. Thanks, signed T." And thanks so much, T. That's awesome to hear that the podcast is reaching the Philippines. Some of our evening meetings here in the Bay Area would be around mid-morning in the Philippines. And with meetings happening all around the world at various times of the day, I'm really hoping that you can find one that fits your schedule. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. And if you did wish to provide feedback for the podcast like T here, you can email us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Or if you are interested in being a future guest of the podcast or have any questions about the program, you can email me directly at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Once again, I thank you so much for tuning in this week. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.